100 years ago, George Gershwin's iconic Rhapsody in Blue was premiered. Audiences sat down on a snowy Tuesday afternoon on February the 12th, 1924, at Aeolian Hall in Manhattan and saw a performance of a new masterpiece that would fuse both jazz and classical music. This work would ultimately become one of the hallmarks of American music. 100 years later, two fantastic American musicians have picked up the gauntlet Gershwin threw down and have composed and recorded a new work that pays both tribute to Gershwin and the Rhapsody in Blue and celebrates American energy and optimism. Released today, February 23rd, on the Naxos record label, a brand new piece by the highly esteemed Grammy nominated composer Peter Boyer called Rhapsody in Red, White, and Blue will be out. Featuring the phenomenal pianist Jeffrey Beagle as soloist and the London Symphony Orchestra, this is a work that is sure to be a 21st century audience favorite. And joining me here over Zoom, I am joined by the composer of Rhapsody in Red, White, and Blue, Peter Boyer. Hey, Peter, good to talk to you again.
Great to talk to you again. Thank you so much. And boy, I hope I can live up to that intro. That's pretty heavy stuff.
I have to say, this is such a great project. I love the work. It's not surprising. We play your stuff on the station all the time. Your compositions are just excellent. You're in full rotation here in Winnipeg.
Love it.
Can you start out by talking about how the commission for Rhapsody in Red, White, and Blue came about?
Yes. So as we sit here and speak today on release day, right, February 23rd, 2024, it has been just over 4 years since this project was launched. So it's been quite a long journey to this moment. And it was conceived by, in all forms, by Jeffrey Beagle, the pianist that you mentioned, who is a quite extraordinary individual in that not only is he a great virtuoso pianist, but he's also passionately committed to the creation of new works for piano and orchestra. He's spent his whole career commissioning pieces for piano and orchestra, and so he's very well known for that reason alone. When he approached me, he had this extraordinarily grand idea, and he said, "You know, it's now early 2020. This was shortly before the pandemic, and he said, 4 years from now, of course, will be the centennial of Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, and I would like you to compose a piece. I'd like it to be called Rhapsody in Red, White, and Blue, but don't tell anybody yet. And I'd like for it to be about as long as Rhapsody in Blue and to be able to be played alongside it, but also to stand on its own. And by the way, I'd like to perform it in all 50 of the United States." So I just said, Jeffrey, you're crazy. This is crazy. This is an insane idea. And I just thought it was too ambitious. It was a great idea. I knew right away it was a great idea, and his title was very clever and very evocative. And I thought, this is just too much because I'm going to be, no matter what I do, I'm going to be compared to one of the greatest, most iconic pieces of American music. How can I possibly do that? So
Mm.
at first I said, I think maybe you should get another composer or something. But he kept after me and he convinced me that I was the right person to do this project. And so that's where it all began 4 years ago. And it's been a long, long process. But really, we're now seeing the full fruition, which is very gratifying.
Mhm. How much cajoling did Jeffrey Beagle actually have to do to get you to do it?
It was a fair amount of cajoling. And we knew each other pretty well, but I hadn't written anything for him. I mean, he's a very persuasive guy, as most people who know him will attest. He's very persistent, and also, I mean, I knew I was going to do it after a little time of him cajoling, but then, of course, the pandemic hit, and that really, of course, changed everything. I mean, all live performances shut down. Other commissions that I was working on ceased to happen because of that. And we
Mhm.
were in a great period of uncertainty. And one thing that he was able to achieve, which was very important for this project, was he was able to get the fundraising done during the pandemic when we were all under this great dark cloud, not knowing when orchestras could get back on stage. And so that was also a factor that made me say, okay, I've really got to do this project. And then, we set off on this journey, and here we are.
Mhm. How much discussion with Jeffrey Beagle in regards to the piano writing did you do? Like, how much back and forth was there between the two of you?
There was not all that much until the last stage of the composition. So I had not shared the piece with him for most of the writing process. I wanted to wait until I felt like I had a sufficient amount of music to show him and enough sense of what the piece was going to be. So, I guess I would say half a pianist. I compose at the keyboard. I mean, I play into software from the keyboard,
Hmm.
and um, my piano chops, will let me play some Billy Joel tunes pretty well. But I can't, I can't hack the Rhapsody in Blue or a Beethoven piano concerto or anything like that. Although I do have, I think, a pretty good sense of what decent piano writing is. But I'm not by any means a virtuoso pianist. So I wanted to challenge him. I wanted to have a piece that he could dig into and really showcase his virtuosity. But I felt that the orchestra was so important as well. And so that balance was something that I spent a lot of time working on. So ultimately, once the piece was, let's say, about 75% done, I showed him chunks. And I said, here's a big chunk, here's a big chunk, here's a big
Right.
chunk. We don't have a piece yet, but now let's look at this material, look at the piano writing, look at the orchestra. And then, it was just a really relatively small amount. I think really 98 or 99% of what I originally wrote stayed in the piece, and he just adjusted a few small things. Some fast things. We'll leave out a note in this chord here. Maybe we won't roll this chord because we've rolled these chords. I mean, really minor stuff. So he was pretty happy with all of that, happily. So, but it was a big woodshedding process for me to figure it out, and also to really study Rhapsody in Blue, and also to study Gershwin's Concerto in F, not to imitate them, but to try to understand them stylistically and also
Right.
get some sense of the piano writing, because I wanted to, really have him be able to show what he can do. And that took a while to get there.
Hmm. The piece was first performed in Utah in 2023. But this is not going to be, it wasn't the only time that this piece is going to be performed. It's going to be
Right.
performed a lot more in the future. Can you talk about this very ambitious Rhapsody National Initiative?
Yes. So this was the other half of Jeffrey's grand vision besides the piece itself. This is something that had been brewing in his mind for a very long time. And it's a very grand sounding thing, the Rhapsody National Initiative. So once again, that's a Jeffrey term. And now he's actually achieved it. Back 4 years ago, I said, there's no way this is going to happen, especially when we were in the pandemic. But, he just refused to relent until he had gotten there. So he had the idea that the piece would be performed by at least one orchestra in every one of the 50 United States. And so he was able to get a number of orchestras to commit to the project before anybody had heard a note of the piece, including Jeffrey. So there was a lot of going on faith initially that it sounds like a great idea. We know Peter, we know Jeffrey, that kind of thing. And I think, he got up to about 25 states relatively quickly. And then it was a slower process to get to the end. In fact, we only got the last state, the last sort of piece in the puzzle just a few weeks ago. This is really, really good timing. And I should say we have 54 orchestras committed so far, because we have a few states with duplicates with more than one orchestra. So yeah, this is going to go on through the 26-27 season. I think about 35 of these states have been scheduled, about
Yep.
50 still to go. So, it's of course just to logistically work out all of those schedules is a big deal. So it's going to take quite a while, but he's going to do it for sure. We know that. And in fact, now that the piece is being heard widely, really starting just now, there is even more interest. So I wouldn't be surprised if we jump past 60 orchestras or more as this goes forward. So yes, it would be great. Wouldn't a Winnipeg performance be fun?
Yes. Yeah. It'd be
That would be
good.
pretty cool.
Canada's not a state, but yeah.
That's right. I know, but it's
Yeah,
it's a
absolutely.
good neighbor in many ways. Yes.
Yeah, it's a great piece. Um, I was listening to it all morning as I was saying off the air. I've downloaded it. Um, the last time we spoke, I said your music is very cinematic, and I hear it again with the Rhapsody in Red, White, and Blue. Did you have any particular images that you wanted to portray in the piece? And I know that one of the things you wanted to depict was sort of the optimism of America. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things I think that defines Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue is the way that he captured the energy and optimism of America in the Roaring Twenties, and also, of course, very specifically New York. I mean, Rhapsody in Blue is a very New York sounding, melting pot sounding kind of piece. But he captured that energy so well, and that's 100 years ago. So much has happened since then. So much has happened musically, and as you say, the word cinematic. There's a whole language of American symphonic music that either originated in the cinema or was influenced by the cinema, none of which existed in Gershwin's time. We're still in the silent movie era in the 1920s. So
Mm.
that's very naturally a part of my musical background and my musical vocabulary. And in addition to trying to capture this energy and optimism for today, which I thought was so important, to try to tip my hat to George, but do it in my own way and in my own fashion. I also wanted to capture in this slow lyrical section of the piece some sense of a kind of grand vistas of the beautiful soaring spaces of the United States. And actually, when we had this premiere in Utah that you mentioned earlier, which was in June of 2023, it was up in the beautiful mountain setting of Park City, Utah,
Mm.
outdoor setting, and just this perfect outdoor scenario. And when that slow section of the piece came, and Jeffrey has this lovely solo, and then the strings come in and kind of envelop him. And I looked around at this open setting. I said, this is just perfect. I mean, this
Yeah.
really, it works so well. And it's not restricted to that setting, but I think that it kind of captures that. And then we come back in the very last section of the Rhapsody once again to energy and to propulsion and to optimism. So I tried very hard to capture those things, both in the piano writing and in the orchestra writing.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed, and I'm thinking about it in regards to time, is in around the 5 minute mark, is some sort of quasi jazzy writing. There are some
Yes.
syncopated passages, and that sort of continues on till about the 9 minute mark, where the slow movement happens, and the slow movement is just a stunner.
Thank you.
The recording was made at the famed Air Studios at Lyndhurst Hall, and it was done with the London Symphony Orchestra. How was it recording with the LSO again and recording this piece with Jeffrey Beagle?
Well, it was thrilling, of course. It also was interesting in the sense that the piece had already had 10 or 11 performances before we made the recording, which was at the
Mm.
end of last November, so not very long ago. But it was my first time conducting the piece. So, you think about the sort of pressure, if you will, involved in that scenario that I've written this thing. Now it's had a number of performances with a number of orchestras and a number of conductors. But here we've got the London Symphony Orchestra, one of the world's great orchestras, in the studio. And in 4 hours, we're going to make this recording. And none of these players has ever played this music before. And that's the kind of thing that, I mean, it's very exciting. And it also is a kind of daunting thing. And really, it's about preparation, making sure that everything is prepared. Was very fortunate once again to work with Simon Rhodes, who's really one of the world's great producers and engineers. He's senior engineer at Abbey Road Studios and has over 1,000 credits in film, major movies and major albums. So knowing that I had him in the recording booth, listening, having prepared, being able to know if we had captured all of this in the various takes, all of that's very reassuring. And I have to both really focus very hard, make sure I'm being as clear as possible on the podium, listen carefully, but also it's a very special moment and it's a long journey. And you want to also kind of step back and just enjoy and luxuriate in that moment. So it's a difficult balance to strike. And I will say one of the most memorable and special moments for me in that studio setting with Jeffrey and with the London Symphony is in the slow section that you mentioned, which I, labored on so hard to try to get this right. And there's about a 1 minute solo piano passage for Jeffrey. It's beautifully how he played it. But then
Yeah.
the strings come in and they just kind of envelop above and below what the piano writing is doing. And standing there on the podium and hearing the strings of the London Symphony Orchestra right there in the room, it's just overwhelming. And I just wanted to cry. I mean, it was so beautiful. And I just thought, wow, I couldn't have imagined this sounding any better than this moment. I wanted to go do a few takes just so I could experience that again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm going to wrap up the conversation by asking, aside from the Rhapsody National Initiative, what's next for you? What's next on the docket? Can you talk about anything that you're composing now?
Well, I have two very significant, in terms of size, commissions that will celebrate the 250th anniversary of the United States, which is in 2026. And
Perfect.
because they have not been announced yet, all I can say is they will involve some of America's best orchestras, and pretty ambitious. So the next 2 years are going to be spent doing a lot of work back and forth between these two projects. It'll probably be another year or so before they're announced, but I have my work cut out for me through 2026.
Amazing. Peter, again, this has just been a real treat to talk to you today. The Rhapsody in Red, White, and Blue is truly an excellent piece. And now that it is out as of today, it is in our classic 107 systems and it's in full rotation.
Love it.
I've scheduled it for Tuesday. I added it this morning and just thanks again for taking the time to talk to me today. It's just been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate your energy and your enthusiasm and your interest, and I hope that your listeners will enjoy this brand new Rhapsody.